Welcome to an exhilarating exploration of the human psyche during its most enigmatic moments. In this captivating video, we delve into the unsettling last wishes of death row inmates, offering a glimpse into the minds of individuals who face the ultimate reckoning for their crimes. With 11 chilling stories that traverse realms of remorse, defiance, and curiosity, we peer into the final requests of those who walk the dark path of crime and punishment. John Henry Ramirez. Prepare yourself for the chilling tale of John Henry Ramirez, whose crime sent shivers through the community of Corpus Christi, Texas, in 2004. At the age of 38, Ramirez committed a gruesome murder that would haunt the memories of many. His target was the 46-year-old Pablo Castro, a convenience store worker. In a horrifying and senseless act, Ramirez slashed Castro's throat while he was taking out the trash, proceeding to stab him an appalling 29 times. The motive behind this brutal killing? A mere 125? This heinous crime took place amidst a series of robberies carried out by Ramirez and two women following a 3-day drug binge. The shockingly violent nature of the crime left scars not only on the victim's family but also on the collective consciousness of the community. It was a crime that demanded justice, and for years, the quest for that justice would be entangled in legal battles and delays. As the legal process dragged on, John Henry Ramirez underwent a transformation of sorts. His case would redefine the role of spiritual advisors in death chambers across the nation. Ramirez, once a perpetrator of unimaginable violence, found solace and redemption in his faith. In March, the U.S. Supreme Court made a landmark decision ruling in favor of Ramirez. The court affirmed that states must respect the religious wishes of death row inmates, allowing them to have their faith leaders pray for them and touch them during their executions. This decision marked a significant shift in how the justice system handled the final moments of condemned individuals. As Ramirez's execution date approached, he clung to his newfound faith and had one last wish. His final desire was to pray on his knees before facing the ultimate punishment. It was a poignant and deeply personal request, a final plea for spiritual comfort and reconciliation. On the day of his execution, inside the cold and somber confines of the death chamber at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Ramirez's spiritual advisor, Dana Moore, stood by his side with a quiet intensity. Moore placed his right hand on Ramirez's chest and held it there as the room fell into a heavy silence. With a heartfelt prayer, Moore implored, "Look upon John with your grace. Grant him peace. Grant all of us peace." As Moore's prayer concluded, Ramirez responded with a solemn Amen. Following this profound moment of prayer and reflection, Ramirez turned to address the family members of his victim, who watched through a window just a few feet away. He spoke words of regret and remorse, acknowledging the heinous act he had committed. "I hope this brings you comfort," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and contrition. "If this helps you, then I am glad. I hope, in some shape or form, this helps you find closure." In his final moments, John Henry Ramirez expressed love for his wife, son, and friends. Resolutely, he stated, "Just know that I fought a good fight and I am ready to go." As the lethal dose of pentobarbital began to take effect, Ramirez took several short breaths and then an eerie silence descended upon the chamber. Within a minute, all movement ceased. John Henry Ramirez was pronounced dead 14 minutes later at 6:41 p.m. CDT. His journey from being a perpetrator of violence to a man seeking solace in his faith and his final act of prayer on his knees serves as a thought-provoking reflection on the complexities of human nature, redemption, and the evolving practices within the criminal justice system. Jean Hathorne. Prepare yourself for a bone-chilling and unsettling tale of family violence, murder, deceit, and an extraordinary final request that captured significant attention. Jean Hathorne found himself on death row for the brutal slaying of 3 members of his own family in October 1984. Alongside his accomplice, James Lee Bethard, Hathorne concocted a sinister plan to eliminate certain family members and gain access to a substantial $150,000 property settlement. Their victims included Hathorn's father, Gene Hathorn Sr., his wife Linda, and their teenage son Marcus. Their intention was to clear the path to their inheritance. Unbeknownst to them, Gene Hathorn Sr. had altered his will, disinheriting Gene Hathorn in an effort to deflect suspicion. In a desperate attempt to divert attention away from himself, Gene Hathorn scattered African-American human hairs and strategically placed cigarette butts near the crime scene. However, thorough investigations ultimately uncovered his involvement in the murders, leading to his arrest and subsequent capital murder charges. During the trial, Gene Hathorn tried to shift the blame onto his accomplice, James Lee Bethard, claiming that Bethard was solely responsible for the killings, while he himself had only fired a shot through a window. Bethard, in a separate trial, was also found guilty and later executed, maintaining his innocence until the very end. Gene Hathorn, on the other hand, persisted in asserting his innocence and appealed his conviction. His legal team argued that his 1985 trial failed to consider the abuse he had endured from his father, which allegedly fueled his deep-seated hatred for his own family. What sets Gene Hathorn's case apart is his deeply unsettling final request. Faced with the looming possibility of execution, he made an extraordinary plea. He requested that his body be transformed into fish food and fed to goldfish as part of an art installation. In the event that his appeal failed, this bizarre request was intended to serve as a broader commentary on capital punishment. He granted consent to the artist Julian-born Marco Everett to carry out this macabre plan. Everett planned to freeze Gene Hathorn's body and turn it into fish food to be consumed by goldfish as an element of an art exhibition. Fortunately for Gene Hathorn, his appeal succeeded, and his sentence was commuted to 3 life terms of imprisonment. Consequently, his grotesque request was abandoned. The case of Gene Hathorn stands as a haunting reminder of the intricacies and darkness within human behavior, particularly within the context of family violence and the criminal justice system. Frank Atwood, prepare yourself for a gripping and captivating tale that revolves around a heart-rending crime and an exceptionally unsettling final request. At the center of this narrative is a man convicted of the kidnapping and murder of 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson in Arizona in 1984. The details of this case are truly bone-chilling. In the crisp September of 1984, young Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona. Her innocent intention was simply to drop off a birthday card in a nearby mailbox. Tragically, this mundane errand would lead to her vanishing and eventual tragic fate. The discovery of her lifeless body in the unforgiving desert months later sent shockwaves through the community, leaving an indelible scar. At the heart of this nightmare stood Frank Atwood, a man convicted of committing one of the most abhorrent crimes imaginable, the kidnapping and murder of a child. His first-degree murder conviction reverberated with the collective horror of a community that had lost its innocence. Frank Atwood's journey through the legal system was marked by twists and turns that spanned decades. Judge John Hawkins, presiding over the case, wasted no time in delivering a guilty verdict. The chilling nature of Atwood's crime left little room for doubt, and he was swiftly sentenced to face the ultimate punishment, execution. However, within 2 months, a dark cloud of uncertainty cast its shadow over the execution process in Arizona. An incident during the execution of another inmate had exposed the horrific flaws in the lethal injection procedure, leading to a temporary halt in executions. As a result, Atwood's life was spared, albeit temporarily. He languished on death row for over 30 years, his fate hanging in the balance while the legal system grappled with the complexities of capital punishment. Adding a deeply unsettling layer to an already disturbing narrative, Frank Atwood made a final request that left an indelible mark on the case. Given the choice between death by lethal injection or lethal gas, Atwood opted for the latter. However, he diverged from the norm by requesting nitrogen gas instead of the state-approved cyanide gas. Nitrogen gas was an unconventional choice, venturing into uncharted territory within the realm of execution methods. Unfortunately, his request was not granted. On a fateful day in June 2022, Atwood met his end via lethal injection at the age of 66. As he faced his final moments, Atwood, who had sought solace in the Greek Orthodox Church during his time in prison, was accompanied by a priest. His last words carried an eerie sense of resignation and hope for divine mercy. The case of Frank Atwood serves as a somber and thought-provoking reminder of the inherent complexities within the criminal justice system, particularly in matters concerning the death penalty. Atwood's unconventional request for a different method of execution shone a spotlight on the ethical and practical challenges that continue to surround capital punishment in the United States, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of criminal justice history. Thomas Douglas Arthur. Prepare yourself for a riveting and captivating tale that delves into a lengthy and intricate legal saga, culminating in the execution of Thomas Douglas Arthur, better known as Tommy. His story is nothing short of chilling, with allegations of contract killing and an unyielding claim of innocence. Let's unravel the key elements of his case, adding a touch of intrigue and fascination. Thomas Arthur's legal odyssey commenced with his conviction for the murder of Troy Wicker in Muscle Shoals, Alabama in 1982. However, the case took a sinister turn when it was revealed that Judy Wicker, Troy's wife, had allegedly hired Arthur for the heinous act. She claimed to have paid him $10,000 to eliminate her husband due to an extramarital affair. Adding to the complexity of Arthur's criminal history was his prior conviction in 1977 for the murder of his sister-in-law in Marion County. While Arthur openly admitted to this crime, he vehemently asserted his innocence in Troy Wicker's death. His attorney suggested that Judy Wicker had falsely accused Arthur to escape the death penalty and secure the possibility of parole. Thomas Arthur's legal journey was marked by a series of twists and turns. His initial conviction for Troy Wicker's murder was overturned, as was a subsequent conviction. However, in 1991, Arthur was convicted for the third time, and this conviction stood firm. Throughout the years, he clung to his claim of innocence, despite the weight of evidence against him. What sets Arthur's case apart is the astounding number of times he faced scheduled executions, only to have them stayed. He became a legal Houdini, narrowly escaping the ultimate punishment time and time again. Execution dates in 2001, twice in 2007, 2008, 2012, 2015, and 2016 were all stayed within days of being carried out. As the final execution date loomed in May 2017, Thomas Douglas Arthur made a request that sent shockwaves through the criminal justice system. He accepted his impending fate, but asked not to be executed by lethal injection, citing a debilitating back injury that would intensify his suffering. Instead, he made an unconventional request to be executed by firing squad. He believed death by firing squad would be less agonizing and painful than lethal injection, given his physical condition. Despite the disturbing nature of this request, the court did not grant it. On May 26, 2017, at the age of 75, Thomas Douglas Arthur was executed by lethal injection in Alabama, marking the end of a legal saga spanning over 3 decades. His case serves as a stark example of the intricacies and controversies surrounding the death penalty in the United States. From multiple convictions to last-minute appeals and a final request that challenged the norms of execution methods, it remains a haunting chapter in the annals of criminal justice history. James Edward Smith. Prepare to be captivated by the enthralling story of James Edward Smith, born in 1952 in Kentucky, USA. His life took a dark turn, culminating in a shocking crime and an extraordinary final request before his execution. Let's delve into the details of his criminal history and his peculiar last moments. In March 1983, James Edward Smith, armed and masked, entered the office of Union Life Insurance Company in Texas. His intention was to carry out a robbery. He confronted Deborah Renee Wilson, who was counting money at the window. Smith demanded all the money, escalating the situation with his loaded gun. Panicked, Deborah Renee Wilson sought refuge behind a file cabinet. Larry Don Rojas, the district manager, approached the window and handed Smith the money as instructed. However, Smith wasn't satisfied and ordered Rojas back to the window. What unfolded next was a tragic and senseless act of violence. Smith, seemingly without reason, shot Rojas in the upper left side of his chest, resulting in his death. Smith made an attempt to flee the scene, but was apprehended by the collective efforts of office workers and bystanders in a nearby parking lot. The stolen money was also recovered, leading to Smith's subsequent arrest and capital murder charges. Smith's trial and legal proceedings were marked by unusual and often contradictory behavior. He even attempted to flee from the courtroom during his trial, but was quickly apprehended. In 1984, he was found guilty of capital murder and subsequently sentenced to death. However, Smith's journey through the criminal justice system took a strange turn when it came to his appeals. His mother, Alexine Hamilton, initially appealed his execution, claiming that he was not mentally competent. This led to a temporary reprieve. But here's where the story takes a truly unique twist. Despite maintaining his innocence, James Edward Smith expressed a strong desire to die. His final request before his execution sets him apart from others. He requested runda dirt as his last meal. This request was deeply rooted in his belief in voodoo rituals. Smith believed that consuming this dirt would facilitate his reincarnation and allow his spirit to move on from the material world. However, the state authorities denied this highly unconventional request as it did not align with the approved meal options for condemned inmates. On June 26, 1990, James Edward Smith was executed by lethal injection. In his final statement, Smith vehemently proclaimed his innocence, asserting that he did not kill anyone. Despite this claim, he did not beg for his life and refused any further legal assistance. Instead, he expressed his readiness to die. Smith's parting words included a reference to his Hare Krishna belief, suggesting a complex spiritual journey that involved voodoo rituals, black magic, and even a stint as a voodoo priest. James Edward Smith's execution proceeded despite the U.S. Supreme Court finding enough evidence to review his case. This unusual situation marked a departure from typical legal procedures. Smith's complex background, his readiness to embrace death, and his bizarre last request all contribute to the enigmatic and unsettling nature of his story. Victor Feguer. Prepare to be captivated by the captivating tale of Victor Harry Feguer, a convicted murderer who played a significant role in shaping the history of the death penalty in the United States. Born in 1935, Feguer led a troubled life that eventually led him down the path of a drifter. In the summer of 1960, he found himself in Dubuque, Iowa, where he rented a room in a boarding house. Feguer's criminal activities commenced when he began making sinister phone calls to physicians listed alphabetically in the local yellow pages. This disturbing quest ultimately led him to Dr. Edward Bartell. However, Feguer's criminal activities took a dramatic turn when he kidnapped and murdered Dr. Bartell in Illinois. He lured the physician by falsely claiming that a woman required immediate medical attention. Dr. Bartell was later found dead in a cornfield, with a single gunshot wound to the head. Subsequently, Feguer was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, while attempting to sell Dr. Bartell's car. Authorities believe that Feguer's motive for killing Dr. Bartell was to gain access to any drugs the physician might have carried for patient treatment. As Feguer had transported his hostage across state lines, federal charges were filed against him. During his defense, Feguer concocted a story about a drug addict from Chicago whom he allegedly met in Dubuque. He claimed that this individual was the actual murderer of Dr. Bartell, and that he himself had killed the drug addict and disposed of his body in the Mississippi River. However, authorities found no evidence to support the existence of this supposed accomplice. Feguer was tried and convicted in federal court, ultimately receiving a death sentence. He submitted an appeal, which was subsequently denied. Only President John F. Kennedy possessed the power to commute the sentence. Iowa's Governor Harold Hughes, an opponent of capital punishment, joined forces with Feguer's attorney to request clemency. However, President Kennedy remained unmoved by their pleas, considering the crime to be so heinous that he denied their request. Feguer was held at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas, but had to be returned to Iowa as Leavenworth was not equipped to carry out executions at the time. On March 5, 1963, Feguer was taken to the Iowa State Penitentiary at Fort Madison to await his execution. During his 10 days on death row, he exhibited model prisoner behavior. For his last meal, Victor Feguer made an intriguing request. He asked for a single olive with the pit still intact. Feger told the prison guards that he hoped an olive tree would sprout from his grave as a symbol of peace. This request reflected his complex and unconventional beliefs as he faced his imminent execution. On March 15, 1963, Feger was executed by hanging. Witnessing the execution were an Associated Press journalist and John Ely, a member of the Iowa House of Representatives. Ely's experience witnessing the execution contributed to his opposition to the death penalty, spurring him to work towards its abolition in Iowa. In 1965, Iowa abolished capital punishment for all crimes and has not reinstated it since, making it one of the 22 U.S. states that have completely abolished the death penalty as of 2020. The execution of Victor Feger marked the end of an era in Iowa. It would be nearly 4 decades until the next federal execution in the United States, that of Timothy McVeigh in 2001. Iowa's abolition of capital punishment for all crimes in 1965 stands to this day, solidifying its place among the states that have completely abolished the death penalty. William Bonin, prepare for a captivating journey into the dark and twisted world of William George Bonin, infamously known as the Freeway Killer or Freeway Strangler. This notorious American serial killer was responsible for a chilling string of gruesome crimes that shook the nation. Let's delve into the chilling details of his crimes and explore his unsettling final request. Between May 1979 and June 1980, William Bonin embarked on a horrifying spree of rape, torture, and murder, targeting at least 21 young men and boys. His victims, aged 12 to 19, were predominantly Caucasian or Latino, often described as slender, pale, and long-haired. Bonin had a sinister preference for young male hitchhikers, schoolboys, or male prostitutes as his prey. Bonin's modus operandi was nothing short of terrifying. He would entice or forcefully coerce his victims into his Ford Econoline van, where they would be overpowered and rendered helpless. Bound hand and foot with handcuffs, wires, or cords, they would suffer sexual assault and endure extensive beatings to their face, torso, head, and genitals. Torture followed, leading to their ultimate demise by strangulation, using their own t-shirts as instruments of death. He often resorted to gruesome methods such as using fire irons, stabbing, or beating his victims to amplify their suffering. Bonin's sadistic nature reveled in their pain, finding pleasure in their screams and engaging in acts of extreme violence, like forcing victims to drink hydrochloric acid or impaling them with ice picks. The level of brutality escalated with each crime, reflecting Bonin's seemingly insatiable homicidal urges. Now, let's explore Bonin's unusual and bone-chilling last request. As he faced the imminent execution by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison on February 23, 1996, Bonin made a final meal order that was both excessive and indulgent. He requested 2 large pizzas, 3 pints of ice cream, and 3 six-packs of Coca-Cola. This gluttonous last meal starkly contrasted with the gravity and seriousness of his heinous crimes. Many saw this choice as a disturbing reflection of his lack of remorse and comprehension of the magnitude of his actions. It served as a stark reminder of the callousness and absence of empathy that defined his twisted personality throughout his life. Even in the face of the ultimate punishment for his crimes, Bonin exhibited an unrepentant nature, denying responsibility and claiming an inability to control his urge to kill in his final interview. His statements and actions leading up to his execution portrayed a man devoid of regret, remaining disconnected from the immense suffering he inflicted upon his victims and their grieving families. Prepare to be chilled to the bone as we delve into the sinister world of William Bonin, a predator whose crimes and lack of remorse continue to haunt the annals of criminal history. Aileen Wuornos, prepare to be captivated by the utterly gripping tale of Aileen Wuornos, a name that sends shivers down the spine. Wuornos gained notorious fame as one of America's most infamous serial killers. Her dark and disturbing spree of violence unfolded between 1989 and 1990 along the highways of Florida, making her not just any criminal, but a rarity in the world of serial homicide, a female serial killer. Wuornos employed a modus operandi that was as brutal as it was shocking. She targeted her male clients, whom she shot dead and robbed. Her victims were all motorists aged between 40 and 65. Wuornos claimed that her clients had subjected her to unspeakable horrors: rape, attempted rape, and various forms of sexual assault. According to her narrative, the murders she committed were acts of self-defense, desperate attempts to escape the clutches of her assailants. Her tale of survival against predatory men became the stuff of legend. The timeline of Wuornos's crimes reads like a grim chapter from a crime novel. Her first victim, Richard Charles Mallory, met a violent end on November 30th, 1989. Wuornos contended that Mallory had brutally assaulted her before she took his life. His body was later found riddled with bullets. The spree continued, claiming more lives. David Andrew Spears disappeared in May 1990, only to be discovered lifeless and shot 6 times in Citrus County. Charles Edmund Carscallon met a similarly gruesome fate. His body wrapped in an electric blanket and shot 9 times with a .22 caliber weapon. Wuornos's crimes knew no bounds, extending even to Peter Abraham Seams, a retired merchant seaman whose body was never found. As the death toll rose, Troy Eugene Barres became another victim, his body found in a wooded area along State Road 19 in Marion County. Charles Richard Dick Humphreys, a retired U.S. Air Force major and former child abuse investigator, was the next to fall. His body was discovered in Marion County, fully clothed but bearing 7 gunshot wounds. Walter Geno Antonio, a trucker, security guard, and reserve police officer, met a chilling end when his nearly naked body was located near a remote logging road in Dixie County. 5 days later, his car was found in Bradford County, a haunting reminder of the horrors that had occurred. Each crime added a layer of terror to Wuornos's story, a narrative she continued to shape. However, her reign of terror was not destined to continue. On July 4, 1990, Wuornos and her companion Tyria Moore abandoned Peter Seams's car after an accident. Witnessing the incident, Rhonda Bailey provided the police with descriptions of the 2 women, triggering a media campaign to locate them. Eventually, Wuornos's fingerprint, found on a pawn shop receipt, tied her to Seams's vehicle. Wuornos was arrested on January 9, 1991, at the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County, using the alias Lori Grody. Her partner, Tyria Moore, was located the next day in Pennsylvania. In exchange for immunity from prosecution, Moore agreed to obtain a confession from Wuornos. The story took a chilling turn when, on January 16, 1991, Wuornos confessed to the murders. She claimed that her male victims had either raped her or attempted to, forming the basis for her self-defense claim. In November 1991, Wuornos was legally adopted by Arlene Prale, a woman who had seen her photo in a newspaper. Wuornos's trial was a harrowing spectacle. While she faced charges for the murder of Richard Charles Mallory, the prosecution used Florida's Williams Rule to introduce evidence related to her other crimes, illustrating a pattern of illegal activity. Wuornos was convicted of Mallory's murder with the help of Moore's testimony. Psychiatrists for the defense diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, asserting that she was mentally unstable. Throughout her trial, Wuornos attempted to introduce evidence that Mallory had a previous conviction for attempted rape, but the judge refused to admit these records as evidence or grant a retrial. In the end, Wuornos received 6 death sentences, 1 for each of her known victims. Her story was fraught with inconsistencies. Initially, she claimed that all 7 men had assaulted or attempted to assault her during her work as a prostitute, but she later changed her narrative. In an interview with filmmaker Nick Broomfield, Wuornos confessed to acting in self-defense, but expressed a desire to end her life on death row. For over a decade, Wuornos resided on death row at the Florida Department of Corrections Broward Correctional Institution, BCI. Her legal appeals were denied, and her behaviors became increasingly erratic. She accused prison staff of tampering with her food and subjecting her to psychological torment, pushing her toward suicide. In her final moments before execution, on October 9, 2002, Warren. Patrick Brian Kinkt. Patrick Brian Knight's name is forever associated with infamy as a notorious murderer whose heinous acts sent shockwaves through Amarillo, Texas in 1991. Born on January 12, 1968, Knight's life took a sinister turn on August 27, 1991, when he committed a brutal double murder that would eventually lead to his execution on June 26, 2007. The victims of Knight's horrifying rampage were Walter Werner, aged 56, and Mary Ann Werner, aged 58. On that fateful day, as the Werners returned home from work, they had an unexpected and terrifying encounter with Knight and his accomplice, Robert Bradfield. Knight and Bradfield forcibly confined the Werners in their own basement, setting the stage for a nightmarish ordeal. Without wasting any time, Knight and Bradfield pursued their sinister plans, seizing control of the Werners' vehicles. They then bound, gagged, and blindfolded the helpless couple. Forcing Walter and Mary Ann into their own van, Knight and Bradfield drove them to a remote location in the countryside, far away from anyone who might hear their cries for help. In a chilling and heartless act, Knight made the Werners kneel before him before shooting each of them in the back of the head. The lifeless bodies were callously abandoned in a ditch on the side of the road. Knight, displaying a complete lack of remorse, returned to his trailer house located next door to the Werners' home and went to sleep, leaving behind a trail of horror and devastation. The sudden disappearance of the Werners triggered a frantic investigation, ultimately leading law enforcement officers to Patrick Knight. Under questioning, Knight confessed to the murders and guided authorities to the location of the victims' bodies. His accomplice, Robert Bradfield, received 2 life sentences for his involvement in these brutal crimes. As Patrick Knight faced the inevitable, he was given an opportunity to make a statement before his scheduled execution by lethal injection. In a rather perplexing twist, Knight chose to address the gathered audience, saying, "I said I was going to tell a joke. Death has set me free. That's the biggest joke. I deserve this." His voice quivered, and he appeared on the verge of tears as he expressed gratitude to God for his friends and made a plea on behalf of inmates he believed to be innocent. In a bizarre turn, Knight also claimed, "I am not Patrick Brian Knight, and you all can't stop this execution. Now go ahead, I'm finished." Despite his intentions, Knight's execution proceeded as scheduled, marking the 18th execution in Texas that year. Randall County Sheriff Joel Richardson, who witnessed Knight's execution, found his final remarks puzzling and devoid of humor. He emphasized that Knight's execution brought an end to a 16-year nightmare for the Werner family. Richardson stressed that Knight himself had initiated the horrifying ordeal. Patrick Brian Knight's crimes and his unsettling last words stand as a testament to the darkest aspects of human behavior. His execution marked the conclusion of a long and painful chapter for the victim's family and the Amarillo community, leaving behind a chilling tale of violence and loss. Johnny Frank Garrett. Johnny Frank Garrett's life and death were shrouded in controversy and allegations of wrongful conviction. Born on December 24, 1963, Garrett's story revolves around the tragic murder of Sister Tadia Benz, a Catholic nun in Amarillo, Texas, on the morning of October 31, 1981. At the time, Garrett was a 17-year-old who faced accusations of committing this heinous crime. According to the prosecution's case, on that fateful morning, Garrett raped, strangled, and killed 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz inside the St. Francis convent. Living across the street from the convent, Garrett's proximity further fueled suspicions surrounding him. On November 9, 1981, he was arrested and charged with the murder of Sister Tadia Benz. Garrett underwent a trial and was ultimately convicted of the crime. He was sent to the Ellis Unit, a facility north of Huntsville, Texas, where death row inmates were housed. Initially scheduled for execution on January 6, 1992, Garrett's case took an unusual turn when Pope John Paul II appealed for clemency. Responding to this plea, Governor Richards of Texas granted Garrett a temporary reprieve. However, this delay did not ultimately spare him from death row. Subsequently, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles conducted a hearing to determine whether Garrett's death sentence should be commuted to life in prison. Despite arguments made by his supporters, including a diagnosis of multiple personalities stemming from child abuse by family members, the death sentence was upheld by a vote of 17-1 on February 11, 1992. At the age of 28, on February 11, 1992, Johnny Frank Garrett was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. While official records from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice stated that Garrett declined to make a last statement, there are reported last words attributed to him at the time of his execution. These words, widely quoted, were, "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my ever-loving act." The case of Johnny Frank Garrett continues to be a subject of controversy and debate, with claims of his innocence persisting even after his execution. Director Jesse Quackenbush's documentary, The Last Word, argues that Garrett was wrongfully convicted due to overzealous prosecutors and inadequate legal representation. This compelling and troubling story was also adapted into the semi-fictional horror film Johnny Frank Garrett's Last Word, further fueling discussions about the justice system and the possibility of wrongful executions. Jeffrey David Matthews. Jeffrey David Matthews was a convicted murderer whose life led him to death row in Oklahoma. Born on September 28, 1972, Matthews faced execution for his involvement in a heinous crime that took place on January 27, 1994. Alongside his accomplice Tracy Dyer, Matthews committed a brutal act that shook the community. On that fateful day, Matthews and Dyer stormed into the home of Matthews' 77-year-old great-uncle, Otis Earl Short, east of Roselle, Oklahoma, with the intention of robbing him. In a horrifying turn of events, Matthews shot Otis Short in the head at close range with a .45 caliber Ruger pistol, while Dyer attacked Otis Short's wife, Minnie Short, cutting her throat. The men fled the scene in Otis Short's truck, having stolen $500 in cash and a .32 caliber pistol. Tragically, Minnie Short survived the attack but later succumbed to natural causes. The investigation into this gruesome crime led to the discovery of crucial evidence, including the murder weapon, a .45 caliber Ruger pistol, found buried in a field behind Matthews' house. Additionally, investigators found a prescription bottle of Xanax issued to Minnie Short in Matthews' home. Tracy Dyer initially pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He played a pivotal role in the case by testifying against Matthews during the first trial. However, in 1996, Dyer recanted his testimony after Matthews' case was reversed on appeal. Dyer testified on Matthews' behalf at the retrial, asserting Matthews' innocence. Despite Dyer's change in testimony, Matthews was once again convicted. Matthews' legal battles continued for years, involving multiple appeals and attempts to challenge his conviction. However, the lengthy process did not ultimately prevent his execution. On January 11, 2011, at the age of 38, Jeffrey David Matthews was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. In his final words, he expressed gratitude to his family and acknowledged his fellow inmates on death row. He also made a humorous remark about the governor not yet calling. Matthews was pronounced dead at 6:09 p.m. The case of Jeffrey David Matthews, like many death penalty cases, raises questions about the criminal justice system, the appeals process, and the use of capital punishment in the United States. If you enjoy watching intriguing stories like this, be sure to click on the video on your screen to continue exploring the world of crime and individuals who leave a lasting impact.